Violet was nearly home from her ordeal. The sun had only just set, but her breath was already freezing the rims of her nostrils. The camp would be getting nervous. They didn't like her being gone after dark, but she slowed to a stop anyway. The first guard post was about to come into view. She was supposed to tell the colonel everything. His orders demanded any sighting of Sunshower went directly to him. It was a simple order, but war made the simple unspeakably complex, often literally. Her sled was heavy with the catch from her trapline, so she had an excuse to walk slowly and consider her options. None seemed good. When she talked to the colonel about her mother, it had been 38 days past her mission end date. No one but Violet had any hope she might still return. So she'd sat in a too-big chair in front of his desk, enduring the gaze of his wolfishly cunning eyes, and asked, "Where did you send her?" It was a simple question. The answer also should have been simple. I sent her to... just fill in the blank with a single word. He'd licked his lips, maybe considering his answer, maybe predicting her reaction to it. His eyes never left her face, and if he blinked, she didn't catch it. Then he said, "Secret missions must remain secret until the war's over, and sometimes even after." After a long brow-furrowed pause, he added, "I think of your mother every day. I understand why you'd want more. If there comes a time when I am able to give it, I promise you I will." Of course the non-answer wasn't enough, but she'd sat in silence, muzzled by his commanding presence. Maybe she'd have broken his hold and demanded more. She imagined it often enough. But his aide escorted her out before rebellion could take hold. They went to the mess, and he presented her with a small bowl of ice cream, reporting with a conspiratorial whisper that it was from the colonel's stash. There were questions as simple as, "Where did you send my mother?" but there were none simpler. Yet as long as the war lasted, her only answer would be that bowl of ice cream. Her mother's missions were a black box to her. They'd hug, she'd get a kiss, and a "I love you, be good," then she'd exit her life. She'd leave in a jeep, or a helicopter that swept down from nowhere, sometimes with her gear and face paint, sometimes in a dress with makeup and a suitcase. In a day or a week, once it was nearly a month, she'd return. It was sometimes worse to know the end date. Violet would count down the days, and if she was late, she had to wait through the worry. There were times she returned dirty and exhausted, sometimes injured, and times she smelled of cigarettes and perfume, and still wore the remains of mascara and lipstick. Quizzing other soldiers, Violet came to understand her mother had been part of a team routing out illegal research facilities. People with money were using the war's violence as camouflage for scientific atrocities in the name of profit. They paid the enemy and provided findings. The enemy provided protection. After wiping her nose on the back of her mitten, she shrugged and continued toward the outer perimeter guard station. Her mother had left her no material wealth, but had been a stream of sage advice Violet found increasingly useful in life. She'd once said, "In the field, thought takes care of itself deep in your brain while you focus on the action. Keep moving, and if there are answers, you'll find them as you need them." She'd see what her brain came up with when she got as far as the colonel. After checking in with the 3 guard posts between her and the building's main entrance, and enduring a rebuke from each for her late return, she dropped her catch off in the kitchen and continued toward the colonel's office. He was at his desk, light on, almost like he was waiting for her. And just as her mother said, she had her answer. Sunshower was hers, not his. Her room was right next to the boiler room in the basement, warm and always pleasantly dim. She shared it with 6 other soldiers. No one was there except Private Pilchick sleeping before late shift guard duty. In the dark, and as quietly as she could, she peeled off a few layers of clothes, hung the wet ones next to the heater, stowed her gear, and slipped into her bunk. She'd been inches away from death more than once. Sunshower kneeling next to her had felt nothing like that, even when her blank white face was right there next to hers. When the Sentinel dashed away through the treetops, there was no sense of relief that she'd gone. There was only a terrible sense of abandonment, and that was what she felt most, there in her bunk. Misery spread through her like blood soaking a bandage. She forced it back with anger. Sunshower didn't belong in the war at all, and there she was, plucking up Violet's people, breaking them one by one, and showing up just to make it clear she was nothing to her. The anger was so fierce it burned through what little energy she had left, leaving her asleep with a furious sneer on her face. She slept through dinner and the rest of the night, but her body knew when it was time to hunt, and woke her for the occasion. Moving quietly to avoid waking her bunkmates, she pulled on her layers of clothes, ensured her special grenade was in its pocket, and checked that her knife, compass, water, and matches were in her small pack. She considered bringing more since today's hunt would likely go long, but decided a heavier pack would be an obvious giveaway. Collecting her rifle, she headed for the door. The guard at the main entrance reminded her she'd forgotten her sled, sending her dashing back to the kitchen to collect it. Idiot, she called herself between clenched teeth. Then she realized she'd also forgotten to make the sandwich she always brought. She growled. She hadn't even left camp and already she was destroying her mission. This couldn't happen. With supreme effort, she performed the 4-count inhale, 8-count exhale breathing her mother had taught her. After 8 breaths, she made herself a sandwich of stale bread, chicken fat, and pickled beets. As an afterthought, she broke an egg into a cup and slurped it down as breakfast. Finally, she set out exactly as she usually did, pulling her sled under the ultramarine sky of pre-dawn, her rifle strapped across her back. The sun was nearly up by the time she reached her blind. She looked at the tree branches with eyes narrowed. The gray morning light of an overcast day drizzled through, but no sentinel waited there. About the level Sunshower had been traveling was an oddly twisted branch. It looked like something passing by had snapped it. She let out a huff of suspicion and examined the next tree she'd seen Sunshower run through. There were 2 similar breaks, one folded over, pointing at the next tree. She walked to that one, too, dropping her sled's lead and adjusting the heft of her weapon. Over the next 200 meters, she followed small disruptions in the limbs above her. Broken twigs, frayed bits of bark, downed dead branches atop otherwise pristine snow. Then the signs disappeared. She assessed the surrounding woods and found nothing to suggest she wasn't alone. Then she walked in a spiral out from the last sign she'd seen. About 50 meters out, she picked up another trail and continued. It might not have been the same one, but there was only one creature carving paths through the forest canopy, and she wanted to know where they liked to go. She followed the same strategy for some time, having to rediscover the trail occasionally. Twice she found footprints in the snow where someone seemed to materialize and then, after a few widely spaced steps, vanish. She became certain that she was indeed following a crisscross pattern of paths. It was a patrol pattern. Patrols, she knew, were a typical Sentinel behavior. She found the thought that Sunshower performed them reassuring. In the early afternoon, she heard a single whisper, like cloth in the wind. It wasn't a forest sound. Breath held in listening, she heard nothing out of place. There was nothing to be seen in the surrounding forest, but the birds were not fooled. While they'd not been raucous before, now they'd collectively opted for silence. She repressed the sly smile her lips wanted to form and continued her work, pressing on well past the point where she could reasonably return to camp before nightfall. As the pattern Sunshower was taking began to narrow, the sun was getting low. She'd passed several abandoned buildings on her trek, any one of which could keep her safe for the night. So backtracking a little, she picked a barn that looked sturdy and untouched. As the sun set, she wrapped herself in a black and white horse blanket and retired to the hayloft to sleep. A prey animal never knows the deep sleep of a carnivore. Part of their brain is always alert, listening for a snapping twig beneath a predatory paw or the swoop of an owl's wings. It might wake to find itself in a full sprint, making an escape it hadn't known was needed. Violet was born prey. In recent years, she'd enjoyed the occasional opportunity at predation, but not so much that she could sleep deeply in a hayloft. She awoke having rolled to one knee, rifle in hand. The sliver of consciousness that had remained on guard as she slept had her aiming from the hip at a human form squatting on the edge of the loft, black against the ambient light of the moon pouring in from the open hay door. The silhouette was like the photo negative of the usually shining form of Sunshower. This was the moment the rabbit had to believe her own story. Lured by the encounter the day before, she had been on an impromptu hunt for the Sentinel. It was risky behavior. No one would know where she had gone. Even worse, she'd become so engrossed in her search that she'd strayed farther than she'd intended from camp. Her carelessness was going to get her killed. If the Sentinel believed anything else, they'd be gone in a blink, and this opportunity Violet had woven would never come again. She lowered her weapon. She'd seen the Sentinel dodge plenty of bullets, even at close range. In what might have been a gesture of thanks or maybe trust, Sunshower's stark blankness ignited in a soft white glow, pulsed once, then dimmed. She was just bright enough to outshine the moonlight. Violet sat still and wide-eyed. She was the rabbit, foolish prey that should never have come here. Sunshower took a step toward her. The stride was too long for her size, like she was skipping some space somehow. She made almost no sound, even on the crisp hay in the loft. It was then Violet noticed the Sentinel's left hand was closed tight. It was such an insignificant detail, but it made the whole situation look wrong. Having one hand closed in a fist interrupted her grace. It was like watching her walk with a limp. Violet eased the tension coiled in her muscles. Sunshower might read it as a hint of trust, or her accepting the impossibility of escape. It didn't matter which. It had the desired effect. The Sentinel moved closer with more confidence, closing the last of the distance between them. What was in her hand? Violet kept her eyes away from the closed fist as the glowing white woman took a knee in front of her. She made no further move, but did glow a little brighter, maybe wanting Violet to get used to her proximity. This worked for Violet. The longer nothing happened, the more they built trust. She let time pass so Sunshower could see her effort working. Then the Sentinel reached out with her open right hand, still keeping the closed fist and its contents to herself. Violet waited for her heart to beat 10 times. Then, looking at the blank white face, not the hand, she reached out and touched the offered fingers. If she were ever to speak of the moment to someone, which she never would, she might describe the experience as like a slow fall. With the touch came a sensation of reassurance, along with a wave of nostalgic melancholy. Violet felt she might form a vision of something out of the feeling, so she tried hard not to. Sunshower's head tilted in gentle sympathy, her glow warming, and a sense of sorrow and longing swept through Violet. She didn't even notice the Sentinel's hand moving until it was lifting her chin like she wanted a better look at her face. Violet leaned forward, closer to Sunshower. She could almost rest her head on the woman's shoulder. A sob escaped her entirely against her will. Tear-streaked grief crushed her features as whatever it was she refused to know overwhelmed her. The Sentinel had pulled this out of her, a sucker punch, a desperate last attempt to win. But Violet was the rabbit, and she had her enemy in her embrace. While Sunshower had been busy breaking her with whatever perverse empathy she was inflicting, Violet's hand had taken a slow journey to the grenade in her pocket. The pin had been eased from its place, and she now gripped the lever. Of course, as Violet pressed close, Sunshower felt the grenade between them, with only the girl's hand holding death at bay. When small fingers twitched against the Sentinel's belly, releasing the lever, she must have understood that, as fast as she would not survive. Violet's last wish was that her unit's greatest enemy would know it was she who'd taken her down. No one else ever would, and if she had to be the rabbit one last time, she wanted someone to know she'd won, even if it was only her opponent. The blast blew out Violet's hearing, replacing sound with excruciating pain. She was in the air for a moment, then on the floor of the barn, the shattered loft raining down around her, hay sliding down in a sheet over her face along with the snow from the broken roof. A shard of something was stuck in her cheek. Her face was an agonizing mass of pins and needles. But when she opened her eyes, she could see. For just a moment, she believed she'd somehow survived the grenade exploding in her pocket. Then a breeze across her belly let her know what had happened. A ragged hole had been left where the grenade had been ripped from her coat. Moonlight through a massive new hole in the roof revealed the remains of Sunshower. If she'd been a speedster, like Photon, she would have plucked the grenade from Violet run a kilometer away, and left it to explode. She would have had time for a cup of coffee before returning to the loft. Sunshower was not a speedster. She was merely fast, and there was only enough time for her to rip the grenade from Violet's coat, turn to put her body between the child and the blast, and take a step. Violet stumbled her way to standing, not sure what to do, having survived. Looking at her hand, she saw her thumb crooked and bloody, broken by Sunshower's rush to save her. She huffed, then sneered angrily at the Sentinel lying like a broken toy in scattered hay and splintered wood, then limped forward. She'd forgotten that Sunshower had been holding something until she saw the corpse's one remaining hand was still closed. She kneeled and examined the stiff fingers of the dead fist, indifferent to the gruesome ruin the explosion had made of the woman. She'd seen people she loved turned into a splash of blood and sewage. The corpse of an enemy was as shocking as a downed tree. There was something metallic in the pale dead palm. With a curious scowl, she reached in and plucked up a string of tiny metal beads. Pulling like a fisherman reeling in a catch, she lifted a set of dog tags from the dead woman's grip. They took some effort to read in the moonlight. She had to hold them at just the right angle. When the letters became clear, she fell from the world through a hidden trapdoor. From wherever she landed, she saw a girl who looked very much like herself reading the tags embossed secret. It was frightening to see her face go pale, like all her blood had just poured from an unseen wound. The girl looked like she was making a sound, maybe a whimper or a low howl. Violet couldn't tell for certain, with a muffled ringing still in her ears. Then she saw the tags in her own hand again, but a door slammed shut in her mind, leaving her nowhere at all. She woke, still wrapped in her horse blanket. The throbbing of her broken thumb pulled her out of a black sleep. The pain triggered an instinct to get up and move, like she could walk away from it, but her traumatized muscles refused at first. After several false starts, she finally stood. The pain of the process was enough to distract from her hand, but no less overwhelming. She walked in little circles, eyes squeezed closed, tears insisting on cruising down her cheeks. The pain didn't fade as much as it became less of a surprise with each step. The memory of the night before was hazy. Battle memories often were, but she knew her rabbit op had worked, and that was what mattered. Though she resolved once again that it was the last time she would be the rabbit. As she debated between the thought of building a fire or heading back to camp immediately, she looked toward the body of her fallen enemy. All of her pain poured out of her at once, like it turned to liquid and splashed to the ground. In its place was something like fear or anger, or maybe relief. She took in a gulp of air that burst back from her lungs in a single ragged cough. The body was gone. The bloody splash in the snow and hay that had fallen in the barn's collapse was still there. Her own footprints led to it. There was no sign of any scavenger large enough to have taken it, or the boots of a retrieval team who would have killed Violet if they'd been there anyway. She ran to the spot and inspected it like a corpse was something that could go missing at first glance. There was still the impression of Sunshower there in the bloody mess. Not only was the body missing, but the bits of it the grenade sent astray were gone as well. Violet imagined the Sentinel melting into the ground or turning into mist. Did Sentinels rot like everyone else? She didn't know and was in no condition to explore the issue. Whatever might have happened to the body, such an unknown was inherently dangerous. She abandoned any thought of a fire and set out toward her camp, her limbic system having placed her pain pleasantly on the back burner for the moment. She hurried as best she could, her muscles complaining less as the morning passed. The unit would be worried, and she didn't want them starting a search, even if it was safe now. The missing body had seemed less significant with each step. Sunshower's superiors had likely somehow ensured her body would be irretrievable should she be killed. They wouldn't want the enemy dissecting their secret weapon. In any case, she decided, she would keep her success to herself. She'd been the rabbit, and it had worked well. If she told everyone the story, they might recognize her as the best rabbit in history. They'd keep her on rabbit duty forever. That wasn't going to happen. It was a kid's job, and she'd never do it again.